Maybe we should get started. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. This is the first day of our education series. We will have it for the rest of the week as well. So, we'll be posting on Slack. But anyway, so today we have Becca Roskill, who is a previous bargaining team member during the Columbia strike. And we invited her today to talk about her experience during the strike. And this today we'll just basically be having a Q&A. So I'll let her talk about her experience, just give a little intro, and then we can have a Q&A, and Angeline will watch the chat for Stack. And so the whole point of this education series is first to bring everybody together because striking can be stressful and we want to build unity. And I think this is the perfect way to do that. Also, it's really important to hear from the experts where strikes have been successful. And so that's the whole point of today. So hey, Becca, if you want to just kind of introduce yourself and just kind of talk about like, when was the Columbia strike? How long, just to give some context for others that don't know much about it. How long was the strike and just like the general timeline?
Yeah, sure. Hey everyone, I'm Becca. It's really nice to be here with you all. And it's been fun to be watching your strike. I usually live in San Francisco, but have been in New York for most of your strike. But I did get to come out on the picket line in one of the first days, and
Did you? That's awesome.
well, on the Parnassus campus though.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I was a member of the Student Workers of Columbia, or I might refer to it as SWC, where your UAW siblings in Local 2710. And that was during my undergrad for 3 years when I served as a teaching assistant and a research assistant. Um, so both of these jobs were included in the union's sort of definition of the unit in the NLRB petition. But since SWC was mostly grad students, our inclusion in the union was always something that Columbia tried to prevent, and it was also something that like wasn't always the priority of our staff or our leadership. So that's sort of one tension that I'll be talking about is like the scope
Yeah.
of our unit and like being an undergrad in that. So you said you want me to give like an overview of the two strikes, right?
Yeah. So people have some context.
Sure. So our first strike was like in the spring of 2021 and it lasted 3 weeks. And that strike ended in a very abrupt and undemocratic way when our bargaining committee entered mediation, much like I know you all have recently entered mediation, and they conceded all of our major demands pretty rapidly over the course of a couple days, and they ended the strike without a membership vote, which is against the UAW Constitution, as you all probably know. And it was also against the like protests from a lot of rank and file members who were demanding a poll. We actually had a poll that required that the strike continue, but they still ended the strike and called for the tentative agreement to be voted on. So we only at that point had like 3 dissenting members on the 10-person bargaining committee who were really representing rank and file interests. And that wasn't sufficient to prevent the bargaining committee from agreeing to a contract that excluded hourly workers, didn't come anywhere close in terms of compensation, meeting a living wage, gave away our right to bring sexual harassment, discrimination to the grievance and arbitration process. And so following that, there was an effort that was led by the Reform Caucus in our union, which was called CAUDU, or Columbia Academic Workers for a Democratic Union. And we campaigned for a no vote against that tentative agreement. and it culminated in the rejection of the contract and calls for the bargaining committee to step down. So then there are a lot of details that I could talk about in the period between the two strikes, but for now, I'll just say that our Reform Caucus won leadership, not only like through the slate that we ran that won 10 out of 10 seats on the bargaining committee in the election that followed, but also through a rank and file led process of rewriting bylaws, which enshrined democratic processes and principles that our caucus had been agitating around for a long time, like 6 years or something by that point. But, well, I guess our caucus had a bit of a shorter lifetime, probably like 3 years our caucus had been agitating around these ideas. And then more broadly, there was also like a shift over these multiple campaigns, the no vote, the bargaining committee election, the strike authorization that followed. And I think through that process, we really like raised expectations across the board. So then when the second strike started later that year, in the beginning of November, sort of on like a similar timeline to your strike, we ended up entering mediation in the third week under the condition that it would be fully open at all times. There would be no sidebars, and the strike would continue. So yeah, it's funny for me, like hearing about where you all are at in mediation. It reminds me of how we were like promised willingness to move if we entered mediation. And Columbia, like later our mediator, were like always dangling like movement in front of us. First it was the promise of movement if we would just enter mediation, and then when movement didn't come, we were told it would come with the first major concession. After we'd made like a pretty major like round of concessions, though, we decided that we'd learned our lesson, and for a long time after that, we held the line, only really making like small little changes. And it was 7 weeks before we really saw a real movement from Columbia, right before the grading deadline. And at that point, we won some really major concessions on all our major demands, but there was one that Columbia was still being pretty intransigent on. They were insisting that we carve hourly workers like myself out of the unit. So this was, another moment that's probably worth talking about in more depth at some point. It required like a lot of bravery and solidarity for us to stay on strike for 3 more weeks, and we ended up winning the broad language that we had demanded initially, that would include all workers based on the kind of work that they do, and not the like title or pay structure that Columbia decides to give them.
I see. Okay, just for I actually have a quick question. So who are the workers? So you were saying that you were an undergrad, and you were also, it sounds like, a teaching assistant paid hourly. Were they just undergrads that were teachers assistants, or I think it was also grad students as well, from my understanding, but
yeah. So the unit's composed of like researchers and teaching assistants, regardless of like undergrad or graduate, hourly or non-hourly. And that's something that like the union is continuing to fight for to this day. It's like a very broad definition that Columbia is trying to pare back and sort of make gaps where they can cut people out of the union. But that's sort of how the union defines itself, as being academic workers, regardless of grad or undergrad or master's status.
Okay, and okay, so then it was the whole, and in our case for the UCs, it's all just, well, in our case, it's the graduate student workers. We have the postdocs, graduate students, ASCs, ARs as well. And for UCSF in particular, it's mainly just STEM people in STEM. So it's just very, very different what's happening here versus what's happening, let's say, at Santa Cruz or Davis, that have a lot of undergrads. And so we are teachers assistants as well, but it's not as prominent as in like an institution that has undergrads. And I don't know if that was really like important too, because it sounds like really Columbia really started, I guess, kind of gave up in a way towards the end when students were not submitting grades. And so if we wanted to like do that at our school, there's been chatter like, does it really matter? Does it matter if UCSF withholds grades? So I just wanted to hear a little bit what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, you all are in a like really interesting position as a campus that's mostly composed of researchers to like start thinking through, or I mean, continue thinking through, because I'm sure you have been like for the entirety of your strike. This question of like really where and like when researchers have their leverage, and what sort of like deadlines in terms of, I was just talking with a friend of mine before this who was like having some creative thoughts around grant deadlines and the sort of requirements that are attached to that grant in terms of reporting effort. So I'm sure that you all have been like thinking about these sorts of questions, and I'm just curious if you've done a sort of like a like map of your power, and if so, like when you think that's sort of at a like coordinated peak, or if it's not coordinated, how it could be coordinated, questions like that.
Yeah, we have to think more about that. We know that likely we'll have a more kind of like sustainable strike. And so we've been picketing, but we're trying to figure out what other ways, like we're trying to ramp up, striking power. So we'll be talking about that in a few days, but I do see a question in the chat. I don't know if Hayden, looks like Hayden, let's open up to anyone that wants to ask any questions.
Yeah, I can go ahead and unmute and ask. I guess my question is just, you mentioned that you guys had to demand that mediation be open. I guess, like, how did you go about doing that? What were your strategies? Because that's pretty much what we're going through right now. And it seems like our mediator and UC are being a little difficult about that. So what were the strategies that y'all used?
Yeah, so the second time around was when I was on the bargaining committee. I like can't really speak to how the like internal decision around open mediation happened the first time. But when I was a member of the bargaining committee, we really had to like push for open mediation. I think Columbia was demanding mediation in part because they knew, or they thought that that would be a way to get us in a room alone where they could sort of pressure the 10 of us. And I think there was like a good week-long period where we had agreed to mediation, but we were refusing to like meet with them until we found a mediator that would like agree to open mediation. So maybe that's a little different in your guys' case, because I think you've already found a mediator and agreed to one mutually with the UCs who isn't open to this idea, right?
I think it's unclear.
Okay. Well then I'd say like, I mean, even if the bargaining team had established with the mediator that it was closed, like I'd say the door is always open for you all to demand that like that process be open. And like, to speak from like our experience, that was a huge source of power like all through the last 7 weeks of the strike. We continued to have high turnout to bargaining, which was a little different in our case. It's interesting like being on your picket line and like knowing that bargaining's going on, but like a lot of people aren't actually in bargaining because I guess it like the picket requirement doesn't count bargaining as picket hours. Is that right?
I'm not sure.
As far as I know, yeah, it doesn't count for us as part of our hours towards pay for strike pay.
So that was one of the things that we did that I actually think really helped engagement, like in bargaining and in mediation. It brought a lot of people like into the room because we weren't asking people to like be somewhere else while bargaining was happening. If we were in bargaining, then like that's where the people who were most engaged with the strike would be at that moment. And I think that helped us like exerting pressure at the table because we wouldn't be bargaining as just like 10 people. We would be bargaining as, you know, like 300 people where 10 of us were talking, but the other 300, you know, they know that they would be in the caucuses where we would be voting on proposals, and they would be just like physically in the room demonstrating that they're paying attention. And I think that really like was to our benefit, because when the university would propose something that was like insufficient, we could come back and say, actually, like, no, we just voted this down in caucus and there are like 400 of us here or something. So it's not just a matter of like a
Oh, is that me or was that?
I don't know what happened.
Uh-oh. Oh no. Okay. Well, anyway, we'll take a little break, I guess. Let's see. Oh, we have a few more questions. Okay.
Yeah, there's 2 more questions, and then I was gonna do a direct response to what Becca was saying.
Okay.
Which also, but Sylvia ended up typing out what I was going to say, which was our bargaining sessions, we get like a 10-minute notice and they happen at like 8 p.m., 9 p.m.
Right.
Wanted to ask Becca like if that was the same for them and if she knows if this is oh, I think she's back.
No problem.
Hi y'all, I'm so sorry.
It's
I'm having
okay.
like some computer issue. I'm not sure what it is because I thought we were charged up, but I'm gonna try to get my computer back up, and in the meantime, I'm on my phone.
Okay, no problem. Take your time.
Oh, I think Sylvia, I thought what Becca meant was that they were bargaining on Zoom, and I guess we can ask Becca to clarify if their bargaining was in person or Zoom. Did you happen to catch?
Yeah,
In
our
2020
bargaining was on Zoom the entire time. It was another thing that I realized is like a parallel between our situation and yours. At least I think, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. Like the university was pushing us to meet them in person, and that also felt like an effort to sort of like get the members of the bargaining team in a room where they were sort of like singled out. And you know, like the management bargaining teams sort of have this idea that like if they just get you in a room, they can like intimidate you into conceding. And it's probably right, because like members of a bargaining team are just humans who are like prone to social pressures. And it's you know, if it's just like 10 members of 10 academic researchers who are volunteering on a bargaining committee versus like 4 professional lawyers who do employment law for a living and are basically like professional intimidators of workers, then it's not really like a wonder why those people getting together in a room would always result in like a concessionary approach. So it's always in their benefit to sort of like change the grounds on which you're meeting, and pushing back on that, I think, really helped us keep our momentum, and also like to make the bargaining committee sort of like feel like they had the support of a bigger group behind us, and just to like make sure that the members were like, from a sort of like transparency perspective, like seeing what's going on, able to comment on things, hold people accountable, and be like, hey, when you said this, it actually wasn't accurate. Or, you know, if there had been like a concession made at the table in an open bargaining session, then that would have been something that the membership was made aware of.
So something to follow up that that Sylvia and I were both thinking the same thing is that we usually only find out about bargaining sessions like an hour before they happen, or even sometimes like 30 minutes before they happen. And they also can happen at really odd hours. I know some of them have been happening at like 9 p.m., 11 p.m., or 8 p.m. And a lot of us are not able to attend at these really odd hours. Was that, 3 a.m.? Yeah. Is that something that you all had to face as well?
I don't know about anything that extreme. We were bargaining like until midnight one night, and had remarkable numbers, but that was also like the group constantly like voting on whether we should like leave and come back the next day and saying like, no, we should fight this out. So we had like a democratic process for continuing to like remain in bargaining, which is a little different. And it had also started at like 8 p.m. or something and just like gone that late. I feel like if it's a matter of you guys being able to like access the bargaining process, it's something that's like worth making clear demands about. You know, bargaining at 3 a.m. is not accessible to the vast majority of workers, and telling you an hour before isn't really acceptable. Like if you ask me, telling you like while you're all picketing isn't really acceptable. It's just like a different sort of like vision of how the strike works, to think that like the bargaining committee members can be in there and the picketers can be out there, and these two groups of people are just doing their thing, versus they're actually the same people that are going to the table and bargaining and picketing during the day. And the combination of the two is sort of like how you pull the win together.
So the next question we have from Anjali, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, is how are student researchers empowered during your strike? I'm having a hard time telling folks that they are still able to do dissertation work while on strike because the line between dissertation versus UC benefiting work is blurry. Do you have any examples of points of leverages student researchers specifically took advantage of?
Yeah, so to be like perfectly honest on this question, I feel like we're still looking to you all to find a lot of the answers around where student researchers get their leverage. I don't want to like overstate like how much we strategized around research, because really like our strategy revolved around the instructors in our unit, and even like a specific group of instructors within those. Like we really focused on making sure that people who have autonomy over their own curriculum can't be scabbed on by a professor because they just teach their own class, and could also sort of like threaten to take away the vast number of like, or the highest number of like teaching hours from students. Those people would be the most have the most leverage when we're on strike, because the number of teaching hours is what ultimately threatens accreditation. And I think that was something that the university was really responding to toward the end of our strike.
Okay, so the next question is, were there departments or groups of members that were more on board with the contract that was TA'd? I think we are looking at a situation like that here. Some departments are very unhappy, but some are pretty okay with the current proposal.
Do you think the question refers to like the first contract or that was rejected? That's like what I'm taking it to mean.
I guess
I can quickly clarify. It was my question. My name is Sylvia. I think it's So nothing has, like, we haven't TA'd a contract yet. It's more so the latest proposal, as well as the concessions that the union bargaining team made. Some people are okay with those concessions and would be ready to TA the proposal, but some people are not. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, I think the most sort of like parallel situation in our case was after our first agreement was TA'd, and as we were sort of starting to think about who the base for a no vote might be, one of the things that we were looking at is who is really strongly affected by the concessions in this contract. So some of the people most affected were like hourly workers, such as myself, which Columbia hires like hundreds and hundreds of in the computer science department. So whereas the computer science department wasn't really that active of a group in the union ahead of that, the no vote was actually a moment where we got lots of cards signed among undergrads in the computer science department because they felt like they had a stake in voting on the tentative agreement. So it's sort of like an interesting moment to think about how groups that are like usually like disengaged or usually not reached out to by staff or maybe by departments where you have like strong rank and file leaders, how like those people might be brought into it through speaking to issues that apply to them. But I do think just sort of like where the shortcomings are in whatever agreement is on the table, and also like who might be willing to like fight for those people are like the sort of questions that you should be asking and thinking about who's the base for organizing around what might be a no vote, or it might be just staying on strike.
Cool, thank you. Gabriel, since you said you can unmute, I'm gonna ask if you're able to unmute right now to ask your question.
Yeah, I was just wondering, so like kind of over the four plus weeks of our strike so far, we've like definitely seen reduced numbers at the picket line, but also, and like this is maybe harder to quantify, but like anecdotally from people in my program, I know that a lot of people who were like on strike in the first couple of weeks have returned to work. And so like our pool of striking workers has shrunk and I think continues to shrink. Did you guys see that at all over your strike, or were you able to maintain kind of relatively consistent numbers of strikers and picketers? And if you like did see decreases, were you able to get people who had been striking and had stopped to resume striking? And like, if so, how did you convince them to do that?
Yeah, we definitely saw like drop off occur over the course of the strike. I don't think that's something to like make you feel like all is lost. It's possible to have moments where people like recommit themselves to going back on strike. It's also possible to potentially strategize around the people who are still with you. I think that like, whatever the case with who's on strike right now, you have plenty of options for organizing going forward. In our case, there was a moment where Columbia threatened to fire or to replace rather like a lot of the workers who are on strike so that they wouldn't have appointments in the coming semester. And we had a very like all out action where we invited labor unions from across New York City, and Labor Notes really helped us put this event on. And there was a lot of like undergrad solidarity, and we just completely shut down campus. And it was a moment that a lot of people like came back into the struggle who had been sort of removed before. I feel like the sort of energy that you guys bring to it and like how you make people feel when they step back in has the potential to like recommit people at any point, no matter whether they've gone back to work.
So just like a follow-up, if that's allowed.
Yeah, that's fine.
Julian and Elena. So like when you're talking about kind of the energy needed, that's like using kind of the physical presence of people on the picket line to like reinvigorate people, like invite them out for a big event and then reinvigorate them through kind of like actual physical events. Is that, am I understanding you correctly in that?
I think that's one part of it, but probably the bigger part is just making them feel like them withholding their labor will have an impact. Like the direct actions and the like pickets and the protests are like definitely important to keeping up energy, but the thing that like labor has that other social movements don't have at the end of the day is the like withholding of labor. And when you're trying to get workers on board your strike, I think it's really important that you're asking them to like make the commitment to not scab. I mean, I know that we like definitely had people on our picket line who were going to the lab after that. And I wish like in retrospect, we'd drawn a clearer line around that. It's hard to do, but I think making people feel like they're like in an important place, or not just in a like feelings way, but like thinking through with someone, what is the leverage of their role? That would be a really useful thing to be doing in organizing conversations and telling them, you know, it's not too late. You would still have leverage from this specific thing. And I'm sorry that I can't name what that thing is. But those are the kind of things that it would be really, really important to think through as organizers.
Yeah, I think the weird thing about science and being like a student researcher is that a lot of like the science happens over months. And so it's not like immediate, like not teaching a course, right? So for us, it's like really withholding data. It seems to be that's kind of what we can do. Actually, I wanted to ask a quick question. So, you know, aside from withholding data in our situation, I'm wondering if you had like talked to faculty at all or got them on board, or did you have them advocate for you? I know that technically like not TAing for faculty probably caused a lot of tension. And so, but were there faculty that stepped up to the plate? And if so, like, how did you like, I don't know, work with them at all, or like try to get more faculty involved?
Yeah, there was a like really amazing faculty coordination effort by some of the rank and file members of our union, who did a lot of like one of my friends calls it like hand holding of these professors who were for the most part just very angry at the inconvenience to their lives, right? But
right.
With some patient conversation, a lot of people were like sort of brought to an understanding of why these demands are important, why we had been brought to a point of doing what we did do. And we ended up, at least in one point of our strike, probably around like week 6, right before the first round of major concessions, having a big wave of faculty support. There was like a big like faculty support picket day. Various department faculty, including my department, the computer science department, which is like not a very union friendly department. As you might imagine, they had written like faculty support letters, and I was like very surprised by some of the names that I saw in there. But there were like pros and cons to how much we were like leaning on faculty support at that point. They had really sort of come to like support this specific demand for arbitration for harassment and discrimination. They like understood why it was really important that we are able to bring sexual harassment cases, Title IX cases specifically, to arbitration, and they were ready to like write letters of support in favor of that. But then when we had sort of like won what we were demanding around that demand, they were sort of like, they turned on us. A lot of them were like, you spoiled brats, you said that you would be done once you won this. And that was like a different moment to navigate in terms of faculty support. So yeah, I don't think we can like discount how important faculty were in like swaying spaces like the faculty senate and putting pressure on deans and things like that. But at the same time, when faculty turned on us, like for the 3 weeks where we were still on strike after we'd won the demands that they had really gathered support around, we still had the power to win our demands without faculty. So that says something in itself too.
I see.
Elena, I don't know if you realized, but you basically asked Anthra's question. So
Oh, whoops.
yeah, I'm gonna move on. No, it's fine. It worked out. I'm going to move on to the next question, which is from Vicky. Do you know about what percentage of your workers were actually striking?
Honestly, no. Columbia's never given us data about our unit size or who is on appointment which semester. It's one of the things that we really struggled around. I would say, like, in terms of the sheer size of our unit, we were probably a minority strike even from the beginning. In terms of like the number of instructors that were actively teaching, I think we were probably a majority strike, at least up until the last few weeks. Our metric for gauging whether we should stay on strike was a weekly poll that was available to all members, where you would indicate whether you were still on strike. So we even let scabs vote in the poll. And we had a double criteria, which said that both groups, sort of like everyone, scabs included, and only people who were on strike had to vote for the strike to end in order for the strike to end, because we as a bargaining committee didn't want to be in a situation where people on strike wanted to stay on strike and keep fighting. And we were telling them, no, you have to go back to work and stop fighting for these demands that you're saying are important to you, because the scabs want you to go back to work. But it actually didn't end up coming to that, probably because it was actually in scabs' material interest to have people keep risking themselves to win better conditions. And we had consistent majorities throughout the strike voting for it to continue.
Okay, let's see. Angeline, I think you're next, right?
Yeah, my question is, so we have the holidays coming up, Christmas and New Year's, and a lot of people are going out of town to see family and friends. And I guess I'm wondering, because you all also striked through the holiday season, was there anything that you kind of wish you could have done better, or what you think went well, what didn't go well, for encouraging people to continue striking after coming back, like after New Year's Day and stuff like that?
Yeah, our strike ended sort of like during the holiday season for a lot of us. I mean, the next semester had not started yet, so it wasn't like we were striking into the next semester. I do think that like threatening striking into the next semester was a big part of where our leverage was coming from. You all weathered Thanksgiving, so congratulations. I know there's a lot of fear mongering around Thanksgiving. There was in our timeline too. And I feel like it's pretty similar with the holidays. Like, I mean, it's a longer period of time, winter break, but at the same time, it's easy to imagine that, you know, you go see your families and then you come back. Maybe you don't go and see your families. Maybe you're an international student who doesn't go home over the holidays.
Oh.
But either way, work resumes and you're still on strike. And, you know, that probably sounds like pretty brutal, staying on strike through the holidays. But imagine how brutal that sounds for UCSF, starting a semester with everyone still on strike.
Yeah,
like I think a lot of their strategy is around thinking, you know, this is all going to be wrapped up and over. So, you know, we'll get through the holidays. And there was also satisfaction like ruining all the Columbia administrators' holidays as well. Bargaining on Christmas night. They were not pleased.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, sorry if that wasn't a very satisfying answer. I don't know that we had like many specific changes that we made. We sort of just like ramped down in-person events, and we're pretty focused on Zoom rallies, like teach-ins, and just like bargaining and having conversations with your coworkers about what a spring strike would mean.
Thank you. Christopher, are you able to unmute yourself to ask your question?
Yes, sorry, I'm just wrangling dinner for a couple kids. So my question is, let me see what I wrote. What do you think ultimately undid the original bargaining team? Was it purely too many concessions too early on, or did other factors have outsized importance? On this topic, what is the state of your union's leadership today? So does it look like how it all ended when you all finally won your contract, or has it regressed to a more conservative orientation? Thank you.
I'm thinking about your first question, what their like ultimate undoing was first. I think a big part of it was that they constantly invoked like this silent majority when they were talking about sort of who they were bargaining for, and would dismiss the people who were demanding more as like radicals that didn't speak for most workers, even though those were like the core organizers that were committed to the union. And what the no vote really showed is that that silent majority actually wasn't a majority. They're just a silent minority who wasn't even voting to approve the strike. A lot of those people to approve the contract. A lot of those people voted against the contract because even they could plainly see you know how concessionary it was and how much it would impact their working conditions. So like a lot of you know, the silent majority was like abstract, but in terms of like who those people actually were, I think a lot of them were like engineers, scientists, researchers. These are the sort of like categories of people that that are sort of like more conservative leadership would constantly say they were speaking on behalf of. And yet those were like key constituencies for the no vote. So that was interesting. They weren't planning to step down immediately after the no vote, but they were sort of embarrassed into doing it. And I think that was right and just, because they failed to represent people and like betrayed democracy on multiple occasions, betrayed even the conservative UAW constitution, and like at the very least, re-electing leadership was what was necessary at that time. And it also is worth saying that like 3 members who were the dissenting members on that bargaining committee stepped down, ran again, and were re-elected. So it wasn't like a moment of hatred and bullying personally toward those bargaining committee members. It was just a moment of realizing that we needed a different political vision for our union, and that the majority of the people on the bargaining committee couldn't represent that. Oh, and then the second question about where we're at now. I am not a member anymore, so I'm not sure I can speak to that like in super specific detail. But I will say that one thing we've learned is that rank and file democracy is something that needs to be constantly enforced and upheld by building relationships with your coworkers and keeping the fight strong in your workplace. And you know, now that we're an established local with our first contract and a sort of steward structure in place, a lot of things are sort of reverting back to like this representative democracy approach. And at the same time, there's like a group of people who are pushing back against that and thinking about how to strategize going forward. So, you know, the struggle continues.
Awesome.
So I have a question about mediation. So we're currently in voluntary mediation, and I believe Columbia, you all also went through, was it voluntary mediation or just different mediation? Can you walk us through that part?
Yeah, so I think this works differently in like private and public contexts, and I'm not an expert on either, but I believe that our form of mediation was actually like similar to yours, as opposed to what it would look like for it's called PERB, right? The group that the UCs could appeal to bring in what would be like a non-voluntary mediation process, I guess, where you would go through like a potentially months-long process of mediation, fact finding, binding mediation. Okay, so what you all did was more similar to what we did, which is both sides agree probably be good to bring in a mediator to help us work this out. Yeah, I mean, the reason that we decided to do that, like I said, was because Columbia was like dangling concessions over our head, and we like believed them. They were saying, oh, we have like a really great offer to give you on arbitration. And we were like, oh my God, they're going to give us an offer on arbitration. That's great. And we entered mediation. And like that was a contentious moment and like a hard one to work through. But like I believe that we did it in a way that was like true to a like democratic process. And we ended up like agreeing to enter mediation together. And then lo and behold, there was no concession on the other side. So taught us a lesson. I don't believe that it was like the same. It was very different than when we entered mediation the first time, which was the bargaining committee making a decision on behalf of the union that rank fell was not on board for. Sorry, I think I'm like forgetting what the main question was. Was it just whether we're in binding mediation?
Yeah, I think what Angeline was asking, like, how did you go through that process? Because we're currently right now in voluntary mediation. And our mediator right now is Daryl Steinberg, who is the mayor of Sacramento.
What?
And yeah, yeah. Yeah, I guess Gavin Newsom recommended him. And I'm not really sure how the process went behind the scenes, but basically it seems like maybe the bargaining team members thought that would be the best mediator because of his previous experience with unions, fighting for unions. So yeah, he happens to be a mayor. So I don't know. I don't know. So we were just kind of curious about mediation from your experience. And it sounds like you had two mediation processes that happened during like in the two different strikes. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, one thing I'll say is we were really convinced the second time that we could find like a better mediator who would like represent us better. We like looked into different mediation methods and we're very particular about like who we reached out to. The one pro of that is that we ended up having a mediator who is willing to do open mediation. But aside from that, like his method was not labor friendly. I think you'll really struggle to find a mediator that's labor friendly, or maybe some part of us thought like, oh, we'll get into mediation and then this third party, which must be neutral, will see that our demands are perfectly reasonable because they are, and they'll demand that we be granted everything we want from our employer. But that wasn't how it went, even when we had what we thought was the mediator of our dreams. Instead, what ended up happening is we just sort of like sidelined him and like went on bargaining as usual. We just like demanded joint sessions instead of caucusing with our mediator. And we only really made progress through those.
So sorry, I just want to clarify. You said you all had open mediation. I believe ours is closed because our mediator is not, I don't know, for whatever reason, pushed to have closed mediation. Was that something your mediator offered immediately to have open mediation, or did you have to fight to have it being open?
Yeah, it was not something he was open to immediately, if I'm remembering correct. I think we interviewed 3 people, or 2 people. I remember 2 interviews, but for some reason I thought we interviewed 3 people. Anyways, we interviewed at least 2 people, and at least one was a strong no, and this person was a maybe. So we were like, okay, we can convince him. And then we just kind of refused to meet for like a week until everyone agreed to meet openly. And as was like the case with open bargaining before mediation, Columbia and our mediator now, we're constantly trying to like push back what we've gained in terms of open processes. Like they were constantly saying we need to meet in person, or we need to limit the number of people, we need to turn off the chat, we need to mute people, and just sort of like constantly sideline the rank and file out of the process, which, you know, goes to show how much the rank and file were like getting in the way of a deal or like preventing concessions. And it also was just something that we had to be really aware of and draw a strong line on. And I think just sort of like refusing to meet was the most effective way that we got around that. And we made it about process. We were just like, sorry, we have a referendum that says we can't meet you in sidebars, so let us know when you can meet us in front of all the members.
Oh, wow. I didn't know you can do that. Wow.
Jen, do you want to go next?
Yeah. Actually, just to follow up on that, like, what do you mean by a referendum, and how did you like make a referendum? Is that something like in your bylaws, or how did that work?
Yeah, it was a referendum that happened actually right before we entered bargaining. Some like quick history behind that was that we had finally gotten to the bargaining table because our regional director, who was just overthrown by a UAWD candidate, Brandon Mancia, small UAWD plug, he was on the Members United slate. But anyways, his predecessor, Beverly Brakeman, who has now been ousted from her position as regional director of 9A, bargained a deal behind the backs of not just rank and file, but literally our entire elective bargaining team as well. And the agreement gave away our right to strike for 2.5 years, 1.5 years, I think 1.5 years. And it really made like the first 1.5 years of bargaining difficult because we didn't have any leverage to exert at the table because we were just totally hamstrung in terms of actual worker power. So then following that, the caucus that had been organizing to try to vote no on that bargaining framework and ended up losing because it was an extremely quick vote over Thanksgiving, organized for this referendum, which went on, I believe it went on the ballots to elect the bargaining committee or something like that. We did this several times where we put like referenda or like we voted on bylaws. And that was just sort of a mechanism where we could, I believe there were 2 options. One said like bargaining will be open and have an option for sidebars. And then one said bargaining will be open and sidebars won't be allowed in any context. And the second one ended up being something that like my caucus campaigned around and won that. And then it was like really useful for us in these later stages of bargaining.
That's really great. That's really great to know. Thanks. Can I go ahead with my actual questions? Okay, sorry.
Oh, yeah, that's perfectly fine. Yeah.
I was just going to ask, were the bargaining team's proposals voted on by membership before you would pass them to the university? And like, were they also were they written by members or just by the bargaining team? Like during the whole strike, not just like at the, I guess, pre-strike, like was that happening continuously with like each new proposal?
Yeah, so we had always sort of had like working groups that like worked on certain issues. But basically when bargaining like picked up pace when we were on strike the first time around, these working groups weren't really consulted anymore. All the decisions were made by the bargaining committee. There would be like informal polls. Often they were conducted by the caucus rather than by the leadership themselves. That would indicate sort of where members were at. And even if it was against the bargaining committee, they were the only ones making decisions about which proposals would go to the table. The second time around, though, we tried to make the working groups like a really crucial part of sort of like how our contract proposals were shaped. So the working groups were places where rank and file members could, plug into an issue that they really care about and work on whatever proposal language would ultimately go to the table. So there would be like 1 or 2 members of the bargaining team in those working groups, but ultimately, like we were outnumbered, and it was a space where rank and file members could like think through and really like demystify all the like legalese that keeps people out of thinking about their contract a lot of the time. And then it wouldn't just be the working group that voted, it would also be if it was sort of like a major thing, it would go to a general membership meeting, which we're having weekly during the strike. And we would vote, is it okay to change this proposal to this proposal in that general membership meeting? And then we would also talk about it in a caucus that was open to all members before we went into bargaining. And usually those had about the same attendance as open bargaining. So we would sort of go over, this is what we're going to do. Is everyone on board with this plan? And that way there were no surprises. And if there were, then like we weren't shy about like taking votes or making decisions in those caucuses.
Yeah, thanks. That really helps. I was just like thinking about how some of our really big wage proposals, wouldn't be announced until until the caucus, which was also only announced like 15 minutes before that was happening. And I was wondering if that's like a typical practice, or it doesn't sound like it to me. Yeah.
I think it is like fairly typical though, as far as like the range of unions in this country and how they operate, but it's not something that you have to like adhere to necessarily, and you can definitely demand something else. I feel like something that you all could be doing is like just thinking about which of these really resonate and would resonate with like the broader membership as demands to take to your bargaining committee, either like for the next few weeks or for what a future bargaining committee would look like, and what sort of policies they would adhere to.
All right, it's already an hour. I think Hayden has a question. And then if no one else has any questions, I think we'll end after Hayden's.
Yeah, it's not that important. We can go ahead and wrap up.
Perfect. All right, well, thank you, Becca. I don't know if you have any last minute like comments you want to make. If not,
I'm just gonna dox myself in the chat and say that any of you can reach out to me if you'd like. And I'm happy
perfect. Thank you. We appreciate it.
Yes.
No, this has been really good. It's been really helpful to hear what does a successful strike look like and everything that you've been through. I mean, it's really helpful for us because we've never experienced this before. This is our first contract. We don't even know like what's right or wrong. So we're just trying to learn as much as possible. So thank you so much. And everybody, we're going to have tomorrow we're going to have a fun barbecue, so please come out. We're going to have 2 labor lawyers, and you can feel free to ask some questions. Yeah, so we'll see you tomorrow.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.